Hello everyone, I'm Inji Samaan, Project Development Specialist from the Office of Environmental Management, working under Catherine Bradley, the State Environmental Engineer. I would also like to welcome our two presenters joining us today, Chris Rasso with Atkin and Mary Morgan with HDR. Each presenter brings a breadth of knowledge transportation planning, and specifically what OEM looks for in their PTAR review. Between the two of them, they have helped OEM perform over 40 Ptars or Ptar methodology review over the last few years. Today's meeting is planned for 90 minutes, but we have reserved GoToMeeting for up to 2 hours to help answer questions that may arise. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the FDOT website to allow others who wanted to attend but couldn't to participate at their conference. During the webinar, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the question box. Our team will monitor questions as they come in and address them at the time or at the end of the webinar. Our presenter will periodically be asking to answer questions using Multimeter on menti.com. Promotes and codes will be provided to you for each quiz question. This training will be useful for those who experience with Ptars as training. Is not intended to introduce what Ptars are. This training is not comprehensive Ptar training, but a supplement to focus on key elements and common questions that we have experienced in the review process. The target audience is project managers, PTAR reviewers, and PTAR producers. The training goals include identifying the PTAR purpose, provide an overview of the different PTAR elements, demonstrate with examples why documentation is so important, and include all a discussion on common comments OEM has provided during its review. And now we'll go to Mary to start the first Mentimeter question.
All right, good morning, everyone. Please go to Mentimeter.com if you haven't already. It's MENTI.com, and we're going to start our first question. I will pull that up for you. All right, so you'll see the code is at the top of the screen. It's 56958075. Go ahead and enter that into your Menti.com. And this is our first question. What type of organization do you represent? I'll give you all a little bit more time to let people get logged in and try out Menti.com and get set up. But it looks like at the moment we have mostly consultants and some DOT and some local government. All right. Well, thank you for answering that question. Again, if you all have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and we will do our best to get those answered. So again, I'm Mary Morgan, and we'll go over our agenda for today. We'll start off with introduction to Ptars, then we'll talk about our methodology, performance measures of effectiveness or MOEs, then analysis tools, our data needs and collection methods, our travel demand and project traffic forecasting, traffic analysis and alternatives evaluation, safety analysis, and documentation. So the image on the right shows you the course agenda that was used during the all-day training back in 2019. Obviously, we're not going to go into as much detail with only an hour and a half, but we do more or less follow the same structure and format as that training. So we'll go ahead and start out with our introduction to Ptars. But before we talk about Ptars, I just want to back up for a little bit and talk about traffic analyses in general. So what is a traffic analysis? A traffic analysis evaluates the interaction between supply and demand of a transportation facility. So demand is how much traffic wants to use the facility, and supply is the ability of that facility, the capacity of that facility to handle the demand. And a traffic analysis also evaluates how transportation facility performs and functions in relation to its goals and objectives. And we'll be talking about goals and objectives a lot here. But goals and objectives can be related to any number of things. It's not always level service and queuing and operations, but it could be safety, environment, reliability, and so on. All right, so we use a traffic analysis to establish transportation needs. What type of improvements do we need? How many lanes do we need? And also to evaluate the performance of project alternatives and design concepts. So how does the facility operate in no build conditions? How does it operate in build conditions under different alternatives? All right, so what is a PTAR? It is the Project Traffic Analysis Report, and it supports the project development and environmental studies, or PD&E studies. And it serves a lot of the same purposes as the regular traffic analysis. It evaluates the transportation needs and the performance of different alternatives and design concepts. But it's also used to communicate important information with stakeholders and the public, and it provides data for noise and air quality analysis. All right, so let's get back over to Mentimeter. Please go to menti.com. And here's our next question. We want to take a look while I get this question pulled up for us. All right, so the code for this one is 38894248. So when you log in, you can use either the silly name, default name that they give you, or enter in your own name. It's totally your choice. And a heads up, this question's a little bit different than the last. It's going to be timed. So you'll get to see how fast you answered the question, if you answered it correctly and compared to other folks. Just give everyone a little bit more time to get logged in. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start the question. Get ready. Answer fast, get more points. What should be the objectives of the PTAR? To determine the alternative with the best traffic operations, or to reflect the purpose and need and provide measurable results for comparison between alternatives? All right, 3, 2, 1, time's up. The correct answer is to reflect the purpose and need and provide measurable results for comparison between alternatives. And a lot of people got that right, so good job. And you can see how fast you went. Everybody answered these questions pretty fast, so great job. Elsa, wonderful job. All right. So now we'll talk about why that is and what that means. So we can first talk about the purpose and need. You'll hear Chris and I refer back to the purpose and need quite a bit because the PTAR is completely based off of purpose and need. So what is it? The need is the main reason for the project. It's the main issue or concern in the project area, and it's why the project came about in the first place. And the purpose identifies the goals of the project based on the need. And these goals help to guide the development of the project alternatives. So the PTAR objectives of the PTAR should reflect the purpose and need. And we also want the objectives to be measurable so that we can compare and contrast between different project alternatives. And the PTAR scope is based off of the objectives, which is based off of the purpose and need. So everything kind of goes back to the purpose and need. And when you're doing a PTAR, it's really important to keep that big picture in mind to understand what it is we're trying to do with this project. The scope can also vary in size and level of detail, and it's affected by a number of things like study limits, project alternatives, analysis years, tools and methodology, and so on. So here's an overview of the PTAR tasks. You start with developing your traffic analysis objectives, which we just talked about. And from there, you can set the rest of the scope of the study. You select your performance measures, determine the analysis approach and analysis tools. Then from there, you can determine what type of data you need. You collect that data, perform the analysis, and document it. So the rest of this training today, we'll be talking about these other steps. So now that we know what a PTAR is, it's also helpful to understand where it falls in the project development process. So pre-construction, there's three main phases in the project development process: planning, PD&E, and design. And the PTAR kind of overlaps both planning and PD&E because they can help to establish transportation needs in both of those phases. All right, technical studies like feasibility studies can be completed during the planning phase. This is done for several reasons. They can help to define the project parameters. They can help to establish the purpose and need. They can help determine funding needs, help to develop alternatives, and they help to define the transportation improvements. And the work that's done during the planning phase and these technical studies can help to inform what's done in the PD&E phase. These technical studies can be carried forward for use in the PD&E phase if they meet NEPA standards and other regulations, if they were performed with sufficient detail and acceptable methodologies, and if they were approved within the last 5 years with no significant changes that would affect the results of that study. If the technical studies are carried forward for use in the PD&E, they need to contain this public notice shown here on this slide. And they also need to be made available for public review during PD&E. So the PTAR has a lot of different reference documents. Several of them are shown on the screen. FDOT has updated a lot of their documents recently, and these are highlighted in green. And even the MUTs should be highlighted in green as well. So there have been a lot of updates, and we'll be talking about a few of these here today. And before I hand it off to Chris to talk about methodology, we just wanted to note that we do provide a lot of the common comments that OEM provides during the review of PTARs. These are shown in this blue box, and these are actual comments that OEM gives on the PTAR. So these should be able to help you all out when you're preparing your PTARs.
Alrighty, thank you, Mary. As Mary mentioned, my name is Chris Russo, and I will be handling the next few slides here in the presentation. Mary did a great job presenting the overview of what PTARs are. Now we're going to get into the actual meat of the PTAR and some of the different elements of it. So we're going to begin by discussing the PTAR methodology letter and its purpose and importance to the process here. Okay, so by definition, what we're showing here is the purpose of the methodology letter is to streamline the proper use of analysis, approach, and tools for the project. So pretty much it's used to document how the analysis will be accomplished to meet the project goals, and it includes many of the elements that are there in the blue box at the bottom of the page. Notice that most of these elements, no analysis is required at this point during the methodology letter. Sometimes there may be some analysis or some data collection that is needed to come up with a proper identification of these elements, but the actual analysis of alternatives or reporting of details is not necessarily in this step. And I should mention, this came up once, the methodology steps here is actually a letter, sometimes here referred to as a methodology letter of understanding, the MLOU, we see at the top of the page. The methodology letter is a separate document that outlines how the work is done, but doesn't include the actual analysis. This letter is reviewed and typically attached in the appendix of a PTAR to receipt most often. It's approved beforehand, and then is used as that guiding principle or roadmap, if you will, for how the PTAR will be laid out and presented. That is the purpose, and we jump into the process. So it's prepared by the analyst and approved by the reviewing entity prior to beginning the analysis. The key word here is the word prior. It's prepared and approved prior to beginning the analysis. This is straight out of the PD&E manual. It states that, I'm going to read this for us, the project manager should work with the reviewers and decision makers of the traffic analysis report to understand the expected outcome of the study. This will help to reach agreement on analysis methods and assumptions early in the process, which is vital to the success of the project. Wanted to read that because it's right out of the PD&E manual. But one thing that we've noticed when reviewing many PTARs, without this review or without a very well-defined methodology letter, is that there can lead to misunderstandings that have led to some major differences between what the PD&E manual or PTAR requirements are and how the analysis was conducted. One of the issues is some of these major differences can lead to the need to completely redo major task elements like forecast models, or even require additional data collection. Since these are like step one in the process of traffic analysis, we understand that this having to make these comments can sometimes lead to major schedule or budget considerations. So to protect just the integrity of the project and the process and schedule of the project, it is the department's request and OEM's request, or they would like to encourage that anyone who is submitting a PTAR, that they could also send it to them for review, so that that review process is not a surprise, or the final PTAR does not receive comments that might be a surprise. And there are some handy tools to helping know what goes into the methodology letter. Here I'm showing a screenshot of a checklist straight out of the traffic analysis handbook. That is a good guide for helping analysts and PTAR creators go through and check the different elements that are involved in here, or that should be involved in the PTAR, or included in the PTAR, I should say it that way. It's a good roadmap here to just keep you on task, and this is something we also look at when we're reviewing PTARs. We have a similar checkbox as well to make sure certain elements are included. So if the reviewers are using it as well, then you can probably assume that it will be important. Okay. So before we get into the next section, just like Mary had, we do have another Multimeter question. While we read this, I will be setting up the Multimeter, but the question is it okay to deviate from the approved methodology? This question comes up a lot. The options are yes, no, an updated methodology must be submitted. Yes, if the reason for deviation is documented in the PTAR, or D, both B and C. So let me pull up Multimeter. Here it is, and you go to menti.com again and use the code this time, 73463932. All right, seeing lots of unique characters come on. Kind of like this laughing cat, that's fun. Or the guy rubbing his chin there, he's already thinking hard. I'm going to hit enter to start the countdown. This is another one where we answer fast to get more points. Is it okay to deviate from the approved methodology, A, B, C, or D? When I used to take tests in school, I used to get so annoyed when it would say both B and C or all the above. It made you think twice about those. All right, so 3. I like this countdown too, that's fun. Time's up, let's see what the answer is. Both B and C. Everyone's most hated answer there. Or no, I'm sorry, my most hated answer for doing tests. So both B and C, what was let's see who had the fastest response here. It goes to the jewel of spades there, fastest, 890 or 986 points. Congratulations, Jules. So the answer here was, yeah, both B and C, which is yes and no. And we're going to go through a couple slides and describing scenarios where an updated methodology should be submitted and when it does not need to be submitted per se. So we have 3 scenarios. I'm sorry, before we get into that, there's essentially 2 documentation solutions like we just talked about on the last slide. Essentially one, if it's an industry standard practice, then the recommendation is to simply document the reasoning for deviation in the report, and I'll have a couple examples of this. Or another solution is if the deviation alters the general makeup of the analysis, then it must be communicated with the reviewing agency, or the FDOT in this case, and documented with an updated methodology approval. All right, so we're going to go over 3 scenarios of these solutions for when and how to deviate from the methodology. And they'll start off with the most simplistic form first, and we'll get more complex as these go. So here's the first scenario. I'll read this. Methodology was written in 2019 and stated that 5 years of crash data between 2013 and 2017 would be used in analysis. And in 2019, this is a very accurate statement. Maybe crashes were only validated up to 2017 in the FDOT-CARS database. But in reality, what happened was the PTAR analysis begins a few years later in 2022, and now wishes to use validated crash data from 2015 to 2019. In addition, also include all fatal and serious injury crashes available to date, maybe through other sources such as Signal 4. And this is a very common scenario that happens all the time. So the documentation solution here is, like I said, this is a very acceptable, normal deviation, given the timing of the MLUs versus analysis. And the recommendation here is to simply document why updated years were chosen and how it benefits the project. This would not be a scenario where you necessarily have to revise the methodology letter, but in all these situations, a quick email for correspondence with the reviewing agency or DOT project manager is a good idea. This is one I don't foresee there would be much of a pushback or concern. So we're getting to a more advanced scenario. This may be an alternative was not known before the analysis began. So here the methodology stated that HCM6 would be used for an intersection analysis. In the alternatives development, a 5-legged intersection was one of the recommended alternatives. That was not known before as part of the methodology process. You don't know what the alternatives the geometric layout of the alternatives may be. The reviewers thinks that, or the PTAR creators think, since HCM does not support non-NEMA phase signals or 5-legged signals, the analysts used HCM 2000 reporting in Synchro and mixed those report sheets in with the other HCM sheets in the analysis. Something we've seen many times in review and not that uncommon of a practice. But this documentation solution is to make sure that's documented. It's document some of the limitations of the analysis tool and the reasoning for deviating from the HCM6 and using maybe HCM prior versions of HCM, which is shown here as HCM 2000. Once again, it's a good idea to communicate that with your FDOT client PM and can include that correspondence and approval updates in the appendix. So this is a scenario where we would recommend it is a good idea to update the methodology letter once you have found some of the alternatives may require a different kind of analysis. And I'm not saying that the HCM 2000 is the only option there. This is just used for example. Okay, so scenario 3. This is a scenario where the analysis is completely different from what is stated in the methodology. And here, the scenario, the methodology states that VISM, a microsimulation tool, would be used for alternatives evaluation. When the PTAR was received, the report analysis uses Synchro for analysis in HCM6, which is a deterministic tool. Very different types of analysis there. So here, this is a complete deviation that alters the general makeup of the analysis approach and results, and must be communicated and documented with the reviewing agency, FDOT. In this scenario, the analyst can resubmit the methodology and seek approval. If approved by FDOT, include the revised methodology in the PTAR appendices. All right. At the end of the day, it's understood that You can't know all of the project elements before beginning the actual project analysis here in the methodology stage. So it is understood and expected that there will potentially be deviations from the methodology. So that we had a couple very common comments that we've given over the years when reviewing Ptars. I think NG said Mary and I reviewed at least 40. That may even be an understatement, even though I gave her that number. We've been conservative there. But some of the comments here that we've received: given the congestion and queuing in the study area, consider reporting volume to capacity in the main report as part of the analysis. Furthermore, BC ratios are one of the MOEs listed in the MLOU. So when we're reviewing these, many times we review the methodology letter first and then ensure that the analysis meets that methodology, and any deviations from the two, we're not here to say are acceptable or not. We're here to ask for some documentation of why. If you were part of that 2019 PTAR training that Mary and myself and others did, I believe Victor is even on the call here, we talked a lot about documentation a lot, and that's where that comes in. Once again, another common question started off here. As agreed on in the MLOU, please provide a matrix to compare AADT volumes with historic trend projections. The content of this one is not necessarily as important, but it just shows another situation where something was in the methodology letter and not in the report. Here's what we went over before per the MLOU. VISM would be used for traffic analysis in addition to HCS and Synchro. However, it appears only HCS and Synchro were used. So this isn't much of a deviation. This was just a one of the three tools was not included in this one report here. Another comment we get a lot is in the methodology, it states that TSM and no alternative was to be included. When we get the reports, we do not see the methodology, the TSM and no alternative in the analysis. So we're just asking, was this evaluated? Please review, revise, or justify as appropriate. Okay. So that gets us through the methodology letter. So that's submitted, that's approved. Now we can actually start beginning the PTAR in itself, the meat of the PTAR, the actual report. And what you'll see here is the first step here is the performance measures of effectiveness. I'm just going to call them MOEs for the rest of the presentation. And what you'll also realize that these sections in the report also follow the order in which they are suggested to be followed in the PTAR process. So that first step was the methodology letter. The next step is to define your performance measures for the project. So that brings us to poll question number 4. Now we'll open the Menti here in 1 second. PTAR should include level of service, queue length, number of crashes, or be selected based on the objectives of the PTAR. Get back to the next question. Notice we didn't give you an all of the above this time. Okay, so this is question number 4. Use the code 45460489. Contestants are entering. Oh, this time we have a guy doing hands that are rocking out at a concert at the top there. I like that. All right, we have almost 60 participants. Looks like the counter is starting to slow down. Once again, this is PTAR MOE should include. So I'm going to start the countdown here in a few seconds. There we go. Answer fast again to get more points. PTAR should include. All right, we're down to the final 5 seconds. Hope this doesn't give anyone anxiety trying to get their answers in on time. All right, looks like we have 68 people responding, 59 of which selected answer D, the correct answer. Be selected based on the objectives of the PTAR. Now, this is a little bit of a trick question, I agree, because most PTARs do include level service queue length, number of crashes, but what the point we're getting across here is that they don't necessarily have to every single time. That they'll be selected based on the objectives or the purpose and need, per se, of the PTARs. Let's see who our fastest responders were. It's not giving me that option. Oh, here it is. Oh, Fergalicious, beating out Jules, Cake, Frosty, and Lion. Congratulations, Fergalicious. All right. So that was question number 4. We're getting into the MOEs here. Back to this presentation. So despite all the words on this page, I wanted everyone to just kind of focus on the graphic over to the right. I wanted to show the process of when and how MOEs are selected here. We already talked about the performance goals as part of the purpose and need. And then the next step here is to select those MOEs. What's important here is that's shown before selecting your analysis tools or analysis software. And what's really important there is that MOEs should be selected before the analysis tools and data requirements are set. The reason being, analysis tools have many limitations on which MOEs they can compute and produce. We don't want to corner into a particular tool just because that was the, we don't want to be limited to the MOEs based on a tool that was selected early in the process. In addition, collecting the wrong data can preclude some MOEs from being used. Sometimes you see data being collected before the MOEs are even identified, just because as creatures of habit, we've gotten so used to just going out and collecting TMCs, host counts, and moving on. And it's like, this should be enough, so let's then delay and level of service will be great for this report and we'll move on. But what I have on the next page, an example of when level of service and delay may not be enough to taint the entire picture. Maybe a turn lane is blocked. Maybe there's different lane utilization data that needs to be collected. So let's look at this picture on this slide. This is a good example of when more than level service and delay are helpful. This image was collected by drone data collection in the Brevard County area. And what I wanted to show here, in this case, right turning vehicles in the circle are being blocked by the through vehicles that are using the right through lane more heavily than they're using the left through lane. What we found through the drone usage here is that this is a condition that would not be found just through simple turning movements alone. Turning movement counts, you would not see that the right lane is blocked, so you may have undercounted right turns, and you also might not see that the through lane has the right through lane has a longer queue than the left through lane. So maybe queue counts could be provided as part of the data collection. Maybe a data collection that includes lane utilization factors, which are great for calibrating different models. Even deterministic and stochastic models both could be used to be, or can use this data to be calibrated. So just a quick example showing why there's more to just simple turning movement counts and level of service. So some common comments that we have in this section of identifying performance measures. Here's the simple comment, but the next 2 slides are going to go into detail here. I think this resonates with many people on the call, but probably the most common question or comment that we have, one of the more common comments that we have given is related to the FDOT policy with those numbers there, 000525006C, with determining the use of targets and for level of service. So the actual comment that's been given many times is this report refers to adopted level of service standards and criteria and suggests that delays exceeding these values are not acceptable or substandard. The policy states that the level of service are targets to evaluate peak hour automobile delay. on the state highway system. So using targets instead of criteria also means that not obtaining a certain level of service does not make the facility substandard. It's just simply a comment that, is not exceeding the target level of service. The second part of the sentence here that I wanted to put emphasis on, circled there, is peak travel hours. Many Ptars I've seen submitted with looking at daily analysis periods only, and not in addition to peak hours. So the comment here is that we're reminding the submitting team or the submitting Ptar that the analysis should be conducted during peak travel hours. And once again, we're talking about documentation justification. The end of the comment reads, provide justification for using daily level of service or provide peak hour roadway analysis. Okay, so after we've identified our purpose, our performance goals, and measures of effectiveness, we are going to start looking at which analysis tools would be the most appropriate for evaluating our MOEs. So many of you have seen this chart from the Level of Service Handbook. It's not a comprehensive list of available tools, but many are common ones here. This chart shows the increasing level of analysis effort and complexity across the bottom, with the y-axis being degree of detail and accuracy. And across the top, probably the most important part here, are the three major stages in project process, whether it be generalized planning, conceptual planning, or the PD&E and operation analysis. Where we're falling here as part of the PTAR is between conceptual planning and towards PDR on the right side. So if there were a line drawn right down the center of the graph, which would include HCM, Sidra, Synchro, Visum, and others, what is important to mention is that not included or not accepted, an acceptable tool for the PD&E or PTAR process is the GSVT, which stands for the Generalized Service Volume Tables. That's shown as an acronym here because this is pulled out of the report in which defines it. But I have a slide here describing all that on the next page. So, use of Generalized Service Volume Tables versus HCM analysis. And this here is probably the #1 comment I've had to give in PTAR reviews. In addition to just general traffic analysis outside of PTAR reviews, I think there's a misunderstanding of what the use of these tables are for. For those unfamiliar with these tables, they're straight out of the Quality Level Service Handbook that FDOT publishes, and is from section, or the tables are at the end. There's many tables for AADT, peak hour, and urbanized areas, rural areas. But these are shown here today because I wanted to mention that in addition to the tables, the report also has in chapter 11 here in bold. Although considered a good generalized planning tool, these tables are not detailed enough for PD&E, traffic analysis, final design, or operational analysis work. It should not be used for those purposes. So we have had to give this comment many times. In the comments, pretty easy. It just says these tables apply to sketch planning level analysis, but not advised for use for PD&E studies. So this is the type of thing that would be ironed out in the methodology letter, which would identify which other MOEs or which other tools are going to be used. So another comment that relates to analysis tools is the use of Synchro versus HCM reports. So right out of the FDOT Traffic Analysis Handbook, section 6.4 states that the department's primary source for highway capacity and level of service analysis is the HCM. The analyst, client, and approving authority should agree and document the reporting methodology at the beginning of the study. So I have an example here, and this is this exact same intersection. This is taken from a project in Sarasota County, and same intersection, same inputs right out of Synchro. It was built in Synchro and analyzed with showing Synchro report on the left and HCM report on the right. These are just screen grabs, so I know they're not the full page there, but what's highlighted in red, we'll start on the Synchro side, are the approach delays and the intersection signal delay. The same things are highlighted on the HCM portion on the right side of the screen. What I wanted to show is what's interesting is that the intersection delay is around 35, 36 seconds in both analysis techniques, both resulting in a level of service of D. Where the major difference is, it's an eastbound approach in both scenarios has a drastically different delay and level of service. And the synchro report is 82 seconds in an F, which might result in somebody coming up with some countermeasures to try and bring this up to more of an acceptable target range. In the HCM methodology, it's being reported as 51 seconds in a reasonable level of service target of a D. This presentation here today is not to get into the differences and what inputs are different, but just showing how easy it is with the exact same inputs and without some additional configuration, how two reports out of the same tool, which was done in synchro, can give differing level service results here. So in summary, from the handbook, it is preferring that be performed with HCM. And going back to a previous slide, sometimes that might even mean using a previous version of HCM, because maybe HCM 6, which is the latest one, does not has limitations on which type of intersections it can analyze. But what the comment is showing is that HCM at least over the synchro reporting process. Okay, so poll question number 5. Synchro is an acceptable tool to estimate traffic operations. Now, after that last slide, this might be a easier to answer, but I think there could be a little trick thrown in there as well. So let's go to question number 5. Hope everyone's enjoying Multimeter. I like seeing the interaction and all the names and colorful symbols come through. So this one uses code 53967987. I'm curious if someone can throw this in the chat. Is it giving you the same icon every time you put in a new number? I'm just curious if the frog has been the same person or the umbrella. Mostly I'm just killing time until we get enough people logging on. All right, we're around 67, which is what we've had around each time. So we will start the countdown. Speed is rewarded once again. Synchro is an acceptable tool to estimate traffic operations. True, false, it depends. All right, everyone has voted. And we see 21 trues, 2 false, and C 47, it depends. It's a little bit of a trick question there because it is an acceptable tool in some cases it is not. And that's why it depends on your purpose and need or your performance measures that were selected. So let's look at our winner again. And I got confirmation in the chat that the icon is changing each time. It looks like Tweedo, Puffy, and Bell. Oh, it's a tie. Look at that. That's the first step we've seen today. Your rewards will be mailed. Actually, there are no rewards other than pride. But all right, so let's jump back into the presentation. So true, false, it depends. It depends. So much of this does depend on what is defined, and that's why the methodology letter is so important in the PTAR process, because there is no clear analysis tool that is the best for every situation. And we can go over, this slide goes over why sometimes synchro may not be the best tool for analyzing a PTAR. And the comment given here is really the difference between different simulation types. The analyst in the comment shows that the intersection is over capacity for 2025 and beyond. The FDOT Traffic Handbook states Synchro does not accurately model oversaturated traffic conditions. Under such conditions, microsimulation tools can be used. And then once again, because documentation is so important and the justification from the engineer is important, or provide justification on why microsimulation was not used. So that goes back to just the documentation. This comment is not saying it must be used, it's just Synchro is not the best accurate model for oversaturated. So sometimes you may want to use Synchro, could be really important, really useful in isolated intersections when it's not overcapacity or little interaction between analysis areas, or a microsimulation might be more important for complex networks or these new innovative intersection concepts. For overcapacity or prolonged congestion periods or managed lanes ramp metering. Just a couple examples, that's not a comprehensive list as well. The main point of this presentation is just to show that there are different situations where each tool would be more useful. All right, following in our process here, we've got our MOEs identified, our analysis tool on board, we got the softwares downloaded, we're ready to start doing some work. We realize we have no data yet. So we've made all these decisions, we've looked at tools, identified MOEs, and now we finally begin the data collection process. And why I have said that maybe 7 or 8 times is that it's so easy to want to start data collection early in the process because we know it could take time getting a sub-consultant on board, getting the counts analyzed, and ready to start work. Many times we'll see that being done before all these steps. So getting into data collection, main point here is actually down at the bottom of the page. The FDOT Traffic Analysis Handbook, section 5.5 states that a field inspection is compulsory or required in any traffic analysis to confirm existing conditions. I would say maybe half of the Ptars I've reviewed don't talk about the field inspection or site visits. I'm assuming most locations do have a site visit. It's just not documented that it was performed, or a summary of the findings are in the PTAR. So once again, it's about documentation of the field inspection or verifying that one was actually completed. So that's what we wanted to share there. That does not mean that the desktop reviews aren't important, but it's also just a field inspection to verify what is part of desktop reviews or photographs. Okay, poll question number 6, and we're not going to go to menti.com for this one because I think it's pretty obvious, and we'll save a little bit of time here. And I believe everyone on the call will get this 100%. Collected field data should be reviewed for reasonableness. And this is when we threw in depends just to throw people off. This time it is true. The answer is true. All data collection should be reviewed for reasonableness. That's why we have intelligent people working on these projects. And checking for reasonableness is defined. It's part of, as part of the Traffic Analysis Handbook. It states that there are a few things you can look at when checking for reasonable data: impossible values and volume balancing. Impossible values might be, for example, let's say you get a movement that is seeing a 1-lane movement seeing 300 vehicles per lane per hour was counted. Now, that's very high. I have not seen 3,000. I'm not saying it's not possible, but for HCM, the theoretical capacity is 2,400. So given it's higher, that would require some sort of reasonableness to check into that, make sure the data was collected properly, or some phenomenon that we're not aware of that is able to achieve 3,000 vehicles per hour. Or maybe you have 600 lefts turning from a single left turn lane as part of your TMCs. Not impossible based on certain timing of signals, but just not conventional. So those things could just be checked. Also volume balancing for corridors. When you have major intersections with many driveways in between, volume balancing can be difficult. But if there are not major driveways, the handbook is stating that both of these values should be within 10%. So when you have two TMCs following each other, that the outbound from one intersection correlates to the inbound of the next intersection with at least 10% certainty there. Once again, if there are major driveways, major attractors in between there, that will, the 10% reasonableness is not in play anymore. And that can just, once again, be documented in the report and say, we recognize the intersections have unbalanced in volumes, and that's due to a large box store on the north side of the road, or whatever it may be. Other data collection questions that come up a lot is the age of the data. Once again, the traffic analysis handbook states that data should be within 12 months whenever possible. Older data is used, and it can be validated and checked for reasonableness. And so what's meant there is, let's say you have some data that's 2 years old, but it was such an extensive process, it's $100,000 in counts. Might want to check with your project manager to see, can you go out there and count 5 of the, let's say 5 of the 60 intersections that were counted, and validate that those 5 are still similar, and can that be assumed that the others are similar too? Now, that's not stated in the handbook, so this is where the methodology letter becomes so important, that stuff is identified and discussed before the project begins. I guess in this case too, not just age of data, but when data was collected. Given our last couple of years during the pandemic, there's been a lot of concerns, unobvious concerns about data that was collected in 2020, early stages of 2021. That would be up to the project manager and the PTAR creator to determine how appropriate that is. Other data collection considerations is model calibration and validation data. Many times this is not performed and presented in Ptars when microsimulation is used. But what we're trying to say here is the same data, the same numbers that are used to create a simulation model should not be used for validating that the model is recreating the conditions. So let's say you're using turning movement counts, you create your model and use, say, queue length to calibrate the model. You could use a different data set, maybe another day of turning movement counts or delay that's measured in the field, to then validate that the turning movement counts and queue lengths match up with the delay that is being experienced. For the most part, what we've seen in many Ptars that have been submitted to OEM is that microsimulation is just used with the turning movement counts, and there's been very little calibration and validation at all, and definitely not additional data sets that are used for the calibration validation process. Okay, so some other very common comments. I think this is the last page for data collection. This is an important one. The common question reads, for intersections, the HCM methodology recommends the use of a single peak hour factor for the entire intersection over movement or approach derived peak hour factors. So this is taken straight out of the HCM. What this is saying is that instead of doing models that have a peak hour factor for your westbound lefts that differ from maybe your eastbound rights, it's one intersection peak hour factor for all movements. And what this does, it avoids, if you will, a super peak of approach volumes. There's many locations which it's expected that you might have the first half hour, first 15 minutes of an hour is heavy one direction, maybe the last 15 minutes of the end of the hour heavy in a different direction. We don't want to analyze those together. We'll blend that all into one peak hour factor as the HCM method shows. So that is the end of the data collection, and Mary is going to take over for getting into travel demand and project traffic forecasting. Now we'll switch that over to Mary.
All right. So now we'll talk about travel demand and project traffic forecasting. So project traffic forecasting is the process of estimating the future year traffic demand for a given project. We usually estimate AADT, which is the annual average daily traffic, as well as the design hour volume traffic, which is DHV. And we use this information for a lot of reasons. It helps us to determine the geometry that's needed for the roadway, like how many lanes do we need. It helps us to assess the operational performance of the facility, which is really important in PD&E when we're looking at different alternatives. And also helps with pavement design. So there's two main methods to do project traffic forecasting, and that's with and without a model, travel demand model. And either way, documentation is needed in the PTAR to explain which method was used and how it was used. And the FDOT project traffic forecasting handbook is available, and either method should follow along with the guidance provided in there. So if you're forecasting with a travel demand model, you'll want to use the most recently adopted travel demand model for that area. It's from the most recent long-range transportation plan. The image to the right shows you the different models in Florida, including the statewide model. Currently, the models use Cube Voyager, but that will be changing as we transition to either PTV Zoom or TransCAD. And this conversion is expected to be completed next summer. And each district and NPO is deciding which software to use and the schedule for that conversion. And if you're forecasting with a model, it's really important to check out that model in your study area to see if it meets validation standards. Most of the time, some sort of sub-area validation is going to be needed to make it, to give you some reasonable model results. Another thing to note is many models do not provide AEDT as a direct output, and you'll need to apply a model output conversion factor. And by the way, a lot of these acronyms we have listed in the key over to the right. There's a lot of acronyms in this industry. I think I learn a new one every day. And then again, please provide clear documentation of what changes were made in the model, such as the plan and program improvements that were included. If you're forecasting without a model, there's also some guidance for that. Typically use historical traffic trends as well as population growth to do that. All right, so after you have your AEDT from your forecasting, you'll need to estimate DDHV, which is directional design hour volume. Typically, we do this for both the AM and PM peak hours. And after you have your DDHV, you can estimate your turning movement volumes. And there's a variety of methods to do this. We have our turns tool as well as our TM tool. There's the methodology in the NCHRP report 765, and there's also the manual method to do this. All right, I think we'll also skip the Multimeter question for this because I hope everybody on this call would get this question right. But the question is, traffic forecasting results should be reviewed for reasonableness. True, false, or it depends? And I really hope everybody would answer A, true. They should always be reviewed for reasonableness. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. I have 4 main ways on the screen here. But some ways that you can check your traffic forecast for reasonableness include checking to see if what your results match the expectations. So for instance, it can be very simple. Like if you're expecting population growth in the area, do your traffic volumes grow? If it's decreasing somewhere, why is that? Does that make sense? Then your traffic patterns are consistent in future years. For instance, if your AM peak direction is southbound and that switches to northbound in the future, is there a reason for that? Were we expecting that, or is that something that needs to be checked out? Future growth is reasonable. Again, if you're decreasing the volume somewhere, were we expecting that as traffic rerouted for some reason? At an intersection in existing conditions, if there's 15 eastbound left turns and that grows to 400 in the future, were we expecting that? Does that make sense? And then finally, traffic volumes are generally balanced. And we talked about this some earlier, but it's important to look at that as well. So please include documentation of this reasonableness check in the PTAR. And if there are any kind of odd things going on, but there's reasons for that, please include documentation of that as well to help the unfamiliar reader when they're reading the report. All right, some common comments. We've talked about most of these. Future growth is reasonable, consistent with the methodology. Does the growth make sense? Does one segment grow 5 times as much as the other ones? Is there a good reason for that? Does it make sense? Traffic volumes increase in future years unless there's an expected change in travel pattern. Again, if we have traffic volume growing everywhere, but one intersection is decreasing, were we expecting that? Does it make sense? Volume balancing. So the traffic analysis handbook says that a 10% difference between upstream and downstream counts for a location with no known traffic sources or sinks is considered acceptable. So if we have 2 adjacent intersections with no major driveways or intersections in between, we're losing half our traffic. Why is that? If there's a good reason, please provide some documentation in the PTAR so we can avoid comments like this. Then traffic patterns are consistent in future years unless there's an expected change in travel patterns. Again, it's just simple things. If the peak direction is flipping, or if you have a turning movement that's growing a lot, is there a good reason for it? Does it make sense? You just kind of want to do these common sense type of checks. All right, and next up is our traffic analysis and alternatives evaluation. So here's the overall process for the alternative evaluation. We start with the methodology, and we collect and prepare our data. Then we do our analysis for existing year and then our future year, and prepare reports. So we've talked about most of these already, and we're going to talk about the last couple steps here now. So time for another Mentimeter question. If everybody could pull that back up. It's time. So if you want to read the question and your options for answers while I get this loaded, you're welcome to. All right, the code for this one is 7006-5227. Give everybody a chance to get logged in. All kinds of cool little emojis or symbols, whatever these are called. A few more seconds. All right, start the question. This one's timed just like the other one. The PD&E alternatives evaluation must include no build and build alternatives, no build TSM&O build alternatives, no build TSM&O multimodal and build alternatives. That's 7 seconds. Okay, time is up. The correct answer most of you got. Great job. It must include the no build, TSM&O, multimodal, and build alternatives. Let's look at our scoreboard. We have some really fast answers in here, just a little bit different. Congratulations. Okay, so now we'll talk about these alternatives a little bit more. So the alternatives analysis is the process of developing, evaluating, and eliminating potential project alternatives based on the project's purpose and need. So that last poll question, you learned that everything we're showing on the screen is required in the PD&E. We have to have a no build, TSM&O, multimodal, and build alternatives. So this does include the TSM&O alternative. Per the PD&E manual, it says prior to evaluating build alternatives, engineering analysis must demonstrate that maximization of the existing system through various TSM&O strategies will not meet the purpose and need for the project. And the PD&E manual also says that the preliminary engineering report, or the PER, must include a section that discusses the alternatives, including TSM&O strategies, which were considered for the project but eliminated from detailed study. And that can be done during planning or PD&E phase. All right, The list also says a multimodal alternative is required. So the PD&E manual says that a multimodal alternative should be considered when it's consistent with the project's purpose and need. So if that's the case, the project manager would review local plans like the long-range transportation plan, local government comprehensive plans, and so on, to see if there's any multimodal projects along the corridor that should be included into the project. All right, so you might be thinking that these are a lot of alternatives that are needed, and that's true, but there's some good news. A lot of them can get ruled out pretty early on in the process. So here's an example project where we've developed 6 alternatives, and we begin with the screening of these alternatives. So we're going to screen them for the project's purpose and need. We're going to look at environmental constraints and design feasibility, constructability, the cost, and here's where you can do that planning level traffic analysis. So you can look at the generalized service volume tables. You can do ICE stage 1, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. You can do that high level traffic analysis to help with screening if needed. So in this example, we were able to eliminate 4 of the alternatives based on the screening, and we're left with 2 where we do a more detailed evaluation, and that's where we look at design, environmental impacts, cost, and here's where we do our more detailed traffic and safety analysis. And we compare those results and find the one that meets the purpose and need the best and end up with the preferred alternative. So the important thing to note here is that the detailed analysis is only needed for the alternatives that meet the project's purpose and need and that are viable. We want to use the same set of tools and assumptions for all of the alternatives, including no build, so we have an apples to apples comparison. And again, the traffic analysis is just one thing that we use to determine how well the alternatives meet the project's purpose and needs. So keep in mind that the alternative that has the best traffic operations may or may not be the preferred alternative. All right, so this slide shows the PD&E relationship to ICE. ICE is intersection control evaluation. It's a process that's used to help identify intersection improvements. On the right side, it shows you the 3 different stages of ICE, and we kind of compare that back to PD&E. So ICE stage 1 is screening, and per the ICE manual, stage 1 can serve as the initial screening of potential alternative intersection strategies as part of the PD&E's alternative analysis and should be completed within the PTAR. Okay, and then stage 2 of ICE is the preliminary control strategy assessment, and it should be included in the PD&E if the PD&E includes a level of detail that includes a final design component. If it doesn't, then it's not necessary. And then ICE stage 3 is the detailed control strategy assessment. And stage 3 is not required for PD&E since it's already a part of PD&E. And then when an approved PD&E study proceeds design, then stage 2 procedures are needed, including the form for any applicable intersections. All right, so after we have the results of the alternatives analysis, we need to document them. It's important to clearly present the MOEs and the results of the analysis for easy comparison between the alternatives. Again, you'll see that word here, reasonableness. Please review the results for reasonableness. Here's some ways for quick checks of that. If traffic is growing, in the future, we would also expect the level of service and delay to get worse. There might be reasons why it doesn't. Maybe we've applied improvements or traffic's getting rerouted. There might be reasons why it doesn't, but if not, generally we expect things to get a little bit worse in the future as traffic increases. Improvements are recommended where needed. If we have a study intersection that's level service F, are we recommending anything there? If not, why is that? And then improvements are consistent with the project's purpose and need. And we'll go through some common comments now. Uses the term capacity when referring to the service volumes associated with the FDOT level service target service volumes. So this is just a terminology thing. The generalized service volume tables show service volume and not capacity. Synchro inputs for signal timing, pedestrian calls, clearance intervals, custom. So this is a bunch of comments squished into one little box. But you know, particularly like in Synchro and other software, it's good to have somebody with signal timing experience review the signalization parameters to make sure that they are consistent with safe operations and make sense for that particular intersection. You want to review things like pedestrian walk time, make sure that that's adequate. You want to look at your clearance intervals, are all red and yellow time, to make sure that those also make sense for the intersection. In Synchro, you want to avoid custom signal phasing. That can lead to some pretty odd results sometimes. And then you just want to review your other inputs, like your lane geometry, make sure that those match either your existing conditions or your build alternative that you're analyzing. Right. Here's another common comment. Unsignalized intersection analysis, overall intersection delay. Suggests removing overall intersection delay for two-way stop controlled intersections. So what we're saying here is for unsignalized intersections, just report the minor street delay because the HCM does not define the overall intersection delay. Here's another one to compare traffic analysis of innovative intersections to conventional intersections. The reported MOEs must account for the multiple intersections rather than the operation of a single intersection or movement. So for instance, if you have two alternatives for an intersection, one is just a standard traditional signal, and the other one is like a MUT, medium U-turn, you can't compare just the operations of the main intersection of the MUT. You need to account for the extra travel time with the rerouted movements at those U-turn intersections. And the HCM does provide a methodology to do this. Then provide commentary on how these alternatives impact or don't impact other modes of transportation, such as pedestrian, bicycles, and transit. Again, we want to make sure we're accounting for all modes, particularly when it's consistent with the project's purpose and need. And then another comment here, the alternatives in the analysis were limited to widening the facility to 6 lanes or any other improvement strategy is considered, such as widening only a portion of the segment, TSM&O, intersection only improvements, or innovative intersection improvements. So again, if we're looking at a PTAR where it looks like widening is not maybe needed, things are operating fine without the widening, you might get this kind of comment if it's not explained already in the PTAR, why, if these things were already considered for some reason. We'll talk about safety analysis now.
You're muted, Chris.
You're right. There are two different mutes on my screen, one on the screen and one on my headset thing. Thank you. You notice that we jump into safety analysis here. We're getting closer to the end of the presentation, but certainly safety is not a last minute consideration. We jump into poll question number 9 before we get into more content. A quantitative safety analysis is required for Ptars. This is a true, false, or it depends type question. I believe Mary is bringing up the Multimeter or Menti. Is that correct?
Yep, almost got it.
I think the key word here is required. Oh, there we go. Code 6340482. I did read the comments that people's icons are changing. I even got a text from a friend saying he was the laughing cat. So that was fun. I specifically mentioned him. All right, I think we're about ready to enter the countdown. I also said people are fast. I think the winning scores are like a fraction of a second. All right, the quantitative safety analysis is required for Ptars. Got pretty close, 50-50 of true, false, and it depends. So which one of our PTAR people was the fastest this time? That was Bell by a fraction of a second. I'm curious how those numbers, the points, relate to time. I'd be curious about that. All right. So the answer here was C, it depends. And the key word there was quantitative safety analysis. And we get into our slide here, kind of describing the difference between the historical past safety analysis and a predicted analysis. The reason the previous question was it depends is that if safety is not identified as part of the purpose and need, safety analysis can be provided in the PTAR, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the analyst must go through all the safety analysis. It's probably going to be recommended as part of the process, but it's not a requirement listed anywhere that you do the qualitative assessment. What is required is some sort of commentary on safety and how the report may be impacted. So let's go over the difference of that there. I would say, without a doubt, every report I've ever looked at or that we've ever reviewed has the historical and past safety review, there on the left side of the screen. 5 years worth of crash data, maybe showing the crash types, even showing maybe differences between crash severities, surface conditions, all that stuff. We're so accustomed to seeing in our analysis reports of any kind. Where many PTARs are different is the predicted analysis that will follow. So what's happened, there on the left of the screen are the crashes that have happened in the past. Many times when you're doing a PTAR, it's alternatives of different configurations, different maybe lane widenings, maybe new interchange types. So what happened in the past is not necessarily indicative of the future prediction of crashes when you're widening or doing any sort of geometric changes. That's where the predicted, more of the quantitative safety analysis comes in. That's where we can look at the different predicted number of crashes for different alternatives. So that is a very common comment that we've given back many times, is that the methodology letter says it will do some sort of predicted analysis and then it's not included. And I get that. Many times the HSM may not apply to certain alternative geometries, but what is recommended is at least a commentary, if not nothing else, a commentary from an engineering judgment of how it might impact crashes, future crashes, and documentation on why typical tools such as the Highway Safety Manual or crash modification factors from either FDOT published ones or the clearinghouse aren't used. So it takes us back to that documentation on why maybe something's not provided, and then providing that engineering or planning judgment in the safety analysis. A quick slide, but I think extremely important, just because it goes without saying all the emphasis that FDOT and other agencies have been putting on safety and target zero or vision zero, and incorporating this into our Ptars.
All right, last but not least, documentation. All right, this is our last Mentimeter question, your last chance to get on the leaderboard. You pull this question up, you're welcome to read this one while I get it loaded. All right, the code for this one is 2469715. Look at all these eager people wanting to get the fastest time. Give you all a few more moments here.
Mary, I got a text, someone saying they answered in 0.97 seconds and they didn't even show up on the leaderboard.
You guys are fast. I think we made these questions too easy. It'll be trickier next time. I'm just kidding. All right, let's start this one. The PTAR report should be concise and easy to understand, summarize analysis methods and results, include highly detailed data in the appendix, use the technical report cover page, be signed and sealed, all of the above. 10 seconds left. All right, everyone's voted, and I see mostly the correct answer, so great job, everyone. Now get to the important part, the leaderboard. Wow, look how close those are. Looks like Casper was the fastest, so I think that might have been the highest point one we've had so far, I'm not sure. Good job, everybody. Okay, so you all, most of you knew the answer to this, so that's great. We'll talk about it a little bit anyway. So the PTAR document needs to document the assumptions, the methodology, the data collection, traffic forecast, the design traffic, and the results. So it should be easy to understand and follow. Please keep in mind your unfamiliar reader that may not know anything about the project, and include your highly technical information, such as your synchro outputs or model outputs in the appendix. The project traffic forecasting, safety analysis, calibration report, those can be pulled out as separate reports if needed. You need to use the technical report cover page that's shown here on the slide to the right. And you also need to use the project traffic assumptions form, and I'll show that on the next slide. And the final PTAR needs to be signed and sealed. So here's that project traffic assumptions form. And basically it helps to summarize your forecast method, what model was used, if you used a model, your data collection year, your analysis years, and other key inputs such as your factors that you used. So over to the left, this shows your typical PTAR outline. Usually you start with an executive summary followed by that analysis assumptions form. And then the main body of the report has the introduction, the traffic analysis methodology, existing conditions analysis, your future year traffic forecasts, then the analysis of your alternatives in future year, and the summary of the results in your appendix. So you want to tell the story, keep it brief, and provide quality control. The quality control should include reviewing the methods and assumptions used to develop the analysis inputs and the reasonableness of the results, as well as the completeness of the results. So you can refer to the traffic analysis handbook for checklists that can help you out with the review process. And with that, we'll hand it back over to Angie and help to answer any questions.
Thanks for the presentation. It was so good.
Great. Chris, do we have any questions in here we still need to answer with our remaining time?
Chris, you're muted again.
Mary, yeah, there's one question in reference to forecast models or demand models being near the edge of a zone. I didn't necessarily have the best answer to give there. If you had any recommendations there, feel free to chime in. What I would say, what I was about to type up was that if the model isn't the best tool for forecasting volumes, and it's a well-known thing there on the edge of the zones, then other methods for growth can be used as well, assuming that's documented and justified.
Yeah, like edge of the like an MPO that has a model, or is that what you mean? What the question means?
Yeah, it's a long question written in the question box. It'd be tough to read it all.
Yeah, I agree. You can always look at historical trends and population trends, as well as the statewide model. That's another tool that could be looked at as well to figure out what makes sense for that particular study area. Will the presentation or webinar be posted? I believe so. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that.
If there are any other questions coming in, we could read those. If not, what I wanted to also do is just in summary, thank the department for letting us or asking us to host this on their behalf. But also the main takeaway from the presentation being many of these comments, we wanted to be transparent of many of the comments that we are giving, because maybe your firm is getting different comments from the reviewers, and you like to see what other firms or other reports are getting in response. It's good to see the breadth of comments, and we hope that those were useful in seeing what the focus of the OEM has been, and where deviations are possible, and kind of just get a feel for where Ptars are. We haven't had, like we discussed, that last training was in 2019, and since that, several Ptars have come through, and we wanted to help with producers of those documents understand, so that the schedule and budgets are preserved and Ptars are pushed through into the PD&E. Confirmation the webinar is being recorded and will be posted.
And if you all have any other questions that we didn't get to, I think we try to get to most of them, or if you think of any later, feel free to contact Catherine or NG, and we'd be happy to help answer those.
There's a question that might be good for NG. Who reviews the Ptars at OEM? Simple.
The districts are divided between Mike Pennington, me, and Neil. Each one of us has his own district. Like me, I have the Ptar from District 2 and 3 and 7. Mike 5, 6, Turnpike, I think 1 and 4. And Neil 1 and Turnpike. Because Neil is new to us, he just joined us. So Catherine is helping him in 1 and Turnpike. So it depends about who is responsible for the district.
All right, so I'm not seeing any other questions come through. Andrew, did you have any questions for Mary or myself while we had a few minutes?
Just got one more, Chris.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll read this one out. Please provide guidance for situations where the future traffic volumes estimates from turns 5 in such programs result in lower turning volumes for certain turning movements due to the AADP inputs and balancing. So this is a condition that is sometimes seen when a tool is used to forecast turning movements in the future. Sometimes they will be lower than what is in the future volumes might be lower than in the existing. Not necessarily the AATs are lower, but certain turning movements are lower. I think in that situation, Mary can chime in as well. That's where some of that reasonableness comes in. Not every tool is perfect, but it provides a guidance on getting closer to a forecast. If a forecast tool provides an unreasonable result, that's where we advise that reasonableness check, and to look into maybe an engineering judgment or other other methods of forecasting that might not have that same condition. I know that's not a clear-cut, direct, like use it or throw it away answer, but I think this is kind of funny. In previous trainings for Ptars, there was a slide that OEM had on there that said all models are wrong, just some are more useful than others. I think that kind of lands here. Mary, did you have any guidance to that question?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you said. You know, I wish we had perfect tools, you know, and you could just plug in your ADTs and it would spit out, you know, perfect turning movement volumes, but that usually doesn't happen. You have to look at them and make sure that they make sense and adjust accordingly so you have reasonable volumes to work with in the future in your analyses and can have some helpful results.
Yeah, and to give an actual example of when I've seen that, when we've seen that in review, the submitting engineer gave documentation why that seemed unreasonable, and almost like showed the original content, crossed it out, and then put in a number that was more in line with a linear growth rate, or I shouldn't say linear, a mathematical growth rate, whatever line fits best, and said that it was kind of overridden, and then exemplified why it still fit, why it was still reasonable, doing that manual override there. So once again, going back to documentation and then justifying the process. Where the questions come up is when you see something crossed out or and written over and no explanation. I think that's where the questions and the comments are going to come up.
Yeah, and if like things change in the future compared to existing patterns, like the examples I provided where all of a sudden your turns grow astronomically, we need triple left turn lanes, or your peak hour, your peak direction flips, you know, it could be reasonable, it might make sense, but you know, for someone that's new to the project and you know doesn't know the area, it's good to provide documentation to explain that. Looks like we got a few more questions. What is OEM's position on the use of K factors? We'll defer to the project traffic forecasting handbook and whatever is agreed to during the methodology. That's something that can be looked at. I don't know, Chris, you have anything to add on that one?
No, we did receive one PTAR in the past where the project was looking to have a unique K number. Data was collected that showed that the K factor was very different than the standardized number for, I forget if it was rural or urban, but just for that land use. And the PTAR provided additional data collection and justification why a different K factor should be used there. So once again, the standard K, I think it's what's identified in guidance to be used, but if there's a reason for deviating, we have reviewed those and accepted those deviations. Next question is, what would be an ideal justification for not using Visum as one of the analysis software for the PTAR, based on one of the example comments from the presentation? What would be an ideal justification for not using Visum as one of the analysis software?
So this is where you have like an isolated intersection without much congestion, and you don't really need to know what the interaction is with other intersections and queuing and things. So that's where you would, you know, not need microsimulation necessarily.
Yeah, and exactly. In addition to that, too, if it's like a rural corridor going from, let's just say, 2 to 4 lanes or 4 to 6 lanes, a tool such as HCM or HCS Plus would be ample for evaluating the performance measures there.
There's one I think we may have missed. Are there OEM suggested data sources for the data collection stage?
I say what's listed in the traffic analysis handbook is appropriate there. Given OEM is a entity of FDOT, any FDOT generated data is I don't want to speak on behalf of the department, but if they're publishing the data, I would assume that is recommended and useful.
Yeah, and again, you know, 2020 data, you know, anything during the pandemic or other disruptions, you have to take a look at those and make sure that they're reasonable to use.
that comes up a lot with, I know the question wasn't necessarily about crash data, but it comes up a lot about that. Brenda Young has been giving some great presentations recently on which crash data is appropriate, where to get that crash data, and how to use it. My understanding that the state has validated all crashes through 2019, but is pretty close to being up to date for all fatal and serious injury crashes as well. But there are other means to getting crash data that is unvalidated by the state. Okay, I'll read the next one. Follow-up question to the question about the turns 5 question. So adjustments are acceptable even though the turn percent would be entirely different. I hate to go on any record saying what is acceptable or not without knowledge of a project, but I think there are situations where you could have different growth differences per movement, and that seems reasonable to me.
And if you're not able to get reasonable results from turns, then try a different tool, because at the end of the day, you want reasonable turning volume so that your analysis results are useful.
Yeah, we've seen many Ptars that use turns 5 and many that don't. It's just a matter of what is the most appropriate tool for the situation. Some have performed it and then flat out say, this is not reasonable, and we're showing it that we used it, but we're scrapping it. We're not going to push it forward for the forecast.
Should the traffic design factors be established in the IMLU, or only the methodology of how they will be established? I think this is asking about when to establish traffic factors. I think they're usually agreed upon during methodology. That would be good so that everybody agrees up front what you're using. But if you get into the analysis and for some reason need to change it, like we talked about, sometimes you don't know everything up front during the methodology. When you get into the analysis, you find new things and learn new things and need to adjust as needed. That can be reasonable, and again, just document why you deviated from the methodology.
I think too there, Mary, in addition to that, certain traffic factors you won't know until after data collection. Maybe your truck factors, maybe a directional factor. What I have seen, and I think is a great way of doing this, is that there are preliminary factors that can be gleaned through different available data resources. In your methodology, you can certainly describe the methodology about how they will be established, and then you could, if interested, you can put preliminary traffic factors. Like through this data source says that K, D, and T are this, but will be confirmed with local data collection. If data collection is not part of the PTAR, like we said, it doesn't always have to be. There might be ample data that's already been provided, and if that's already provided and you know it already, putting in the methodology won't hurt, because that can get approved. But I think the methodology in which the traffic factors are created is the more important of the two questions there. Okay, question: if some of the districts are starting to use Transcad for demand modeling, would it be okay to introduce a sister tool, Transmodeler? I have not heard of any specific tools that are required versus not. And if there's justification for, I feel bad always saying that, but if there's justification where Transmodeler is the better analysis tool to address the MOEs, then in the purpose and need, then that is an acceptable tool.
Yeah, I agree. Hopefully that's something that can be determined up front in the methodology and get everyone on board with it.
For quantitative safety analysis, which is the preferred, CMF or predictive using safety performance functions?
That's gonna be our favorite answer. It depends.
Well, one's gonna be a simpler approach than the other. The safety performance functions would be preferred. However, we understand how limited some of those are in many projects and how many more CMF, forever crash modification factors, there are in the industry. So if safety performance functions are available, that would be like the top-notch preferred, and then CMF as a alternative.
Yeah. And if safety is part of the purpose and need for the project, a more in-depth safety analysis, like using SPFs, might be the best thing. And again, that can be determined upfront to help determine the best alternative for the project based on the purpose and need.
And for many alternatives, many of the alternatives that don't have a safety performance function with them, many reports have come in with CMFs, and that math is shown and the impacts are shown. It's my understanding that central office stated there is no validated crash data. 2021 crash data may be included in current projects. So there's been a lot of movement in use of crash data over the last few months, especially in the last year. It's something I don't have a perfect answer for you, John, but I'd like to follow up. I'd like to know that as well.
We would defer to the safety office on what the latest guidance is. But yeah, I see what you're saying, because we've been seeing some guidance too to use the most recent data, which is, regardless of what you use, it's really good to look at more recent data, crash data, even if you're only using the older validated data, just to make sure that there's nothing new going on at your study area, any new trends or anything that you need to be aware of. But, again, we would defer to the safety office for that guidance. And we can follow back up with that too.
Looks like a comment that more so than the question. FDOT has recommended using CAR first, supplemented by Signal 4. Many reports that we've received have that same approach. But that guidance, like Mary said, is changing and would default to Office of Safety. And Victor makes a good point in the questions that the department is working on combining CAR and Signal 4, so we don't have to have these questions in the future.
I think we're all looking forward to that.
Very much.
I know I am. Any other questions? Just a few more comments about the crash data.
Yes, I think from the PTAR perspective, if you notice, almost every comment or guidance that we provided here today was not generated from OEM. It was referencing other departments and other traffic engineering guidance or PD&E manual, or so we're providing just where the reference came from rather than identifying anything new. So a lot of that does come back to checking the FDOT guidance from whatever office it comes from, and then providing documentation in the methodology and in the report for where decisions, what decisions were made and what guidance it was from. I think that answers a lot of questions there.
Yeah.
Going back to just justification and documentation. It's going to seem like a cop-out type answer, but during review, if something seems reasonable and makes sense and it follows guidance, then it works.
Yeah.
Well, Angie, I see the questions starting to taper off. We can give it another minute or two for any more. We're certainly available for follow-up questions if any do come in, Angie, or are posted later on to help out.
Yeah, if anyone have any other question, he can send it to me and I can send the answer back. And anyway, this presentation will be available on our website, the recorded video and the PowerPoint. And at the end of this month, you will receive a certificate with the PGH hour, the PGH credit hour. And anyone if has any question, he can send it to us. Thank you for attending.
All right, thank you.